Alright everyone, we start off today talking about Biden's approval polling. He has officially cracked through his floor that he maintained for months and months, and I pointed out that it was difficult, generally speaking, when we see a more or less linear trajectory in polling, it's difficult for a president to drop below that approval level, because what that represents is a hardened core of people, partisans, actual fans of yours, and people who lean ideologically towards what you're saying. It may be single issue, it may not be. And Biden was holding steady around 41% approval. He hadn't gone below 40 in the approval aggregate on RCP, link in the description, again for many, many months, basically all year. Now he's falling off a cliff, and he's at about 39% approval. He's managed to crack through that long-term floor. What you see is that you have ups and downs within a fairly linear trajectory in some cases, and there's a peak and there's a trough. That's just statistical noise. It's usually a 3-4 point oscillation back and forth. Maybe it hits 43, maybe it hits 40, but it doesn't go above or below that trajectory. The real number is relatively stable, and it's somewhere in the middle within that data. When you therefore fall through that, what this represents is, because these are presumably Democrat partisans, people who were actual fans of Biden, the ones that weren't 6 feet under during the election, and ideological individuals who generally support at least large elements of his agenda. If he's lost their approval, what it represents is that either Democrat partisans have begun to sour on Biden. I think that's most of this number. Actual fans of his have stopped being fans of his and say, well, fuck this. There's probably an element of that because Biden hasn't done many of the things that he said he wanted to do. I disagree with him doing them, so I'm pleased about that. But imagine that you were snookered in by the student loan debt forgiveness, Green New Deal, take all the guns sort of thing, and none of these things has actually happened. And represents people who they lean left ideologically. Again, they're looking at his agenda, at what was actually done now a year and a half into the asterisk administration, and basically nothing's there. Ultimately, though, I think that the main reason for this is just the economy. It's the economy, stupid, and keep in mind that every point he drops, he's now like 4 points below where Trump was in the aggregate, to be clear, at the same point in his presidency. And Biden gets nonstop glowing praise and coverage from literally the entire legacy media, the exact opposite of what Trump suffered with. If you can't maintain your approval, at least in the 40s, under such a circumstance, the only thing I can think of outside of border communities and the border crisis, or people who may, like the remnant, very small anti-war left who looks at what he's doing in Ukraine and says, fuck you. Other than that, I think 90% of it's people that are going to the pump, and the gas is much more expensive. People have burned through what savings they did have, and now are in really, really troubled times, to the point where they are cutting costs significantly. This is, by the way, that special point. I think we've basically achieved it, and this will show up in the next jobs report. We're probably hitting the point at which layoffs begin to occur because people are throttling back their spending because they don't have any money to spend. So they're choosing to buy cheaper goods, which means Chinese goods in many cases. That's not good for the U.S. economy. Or they're simply buying less. So the middle class is now clearly being impacted. When I look at numbers like this, if I assume that it's economic data, mainly that we're seeing here, and I do, I think that that's evidence that the middle class, and this represents, by the way, several million people in these points that are being aggregated here, several million voters. It's about 2 million people, I think. These individuals are now hurting for certain. The middle class has begun to erode from the bottom. It's no longer a working or lower class problem, the economy. It has migrated into stagflationary territory, I think, and we are on the brink of a recession. By the way, if we get, and I think this is next month that we'll get the data, because there's always a delay, a lag. We get through this month, we've ended quarter 2. Sometime July or August, you're going to get the new GDP data. If it has shrunk at all, we are officially in a recession. The legacy media will not be able to shield Joe Biden. They'll put out a few fluff pieces and say, well, here's the top 5 reasons a recession might be a good thing for us right now. hey, you can eat bugs, downsize a little bit, tighten your belt, you could use it, there's an obesity crisis, so skip a meal. This is why we need to subsidize insulin. Here's a tale about a grandma who went a week without any food. She ate half of her cat's food because otherwise she couldn't afford her insulin shots. Things like that. I think that they're beginning to sour on Biden too. The problem is that the economic structure of the U.S. means that even the wealthy socio-elites and so forth that support Biden glowingly will begin to see economic problems. Not many of them. The investor and banker class do fine. They don't care if they collapse outright because the government will just take more money from people and bail them out like we did in 2008. There are other people, though, that are in that upper class that are going to begin to see problems. Let's say you own, for example, a small regional business chain, and now you're seeing 20% less profits because people simply aren't buying. They're not going to your store. They're going to Dollar General or something like that. They're going to the bulk store. You're losing a lot of business, laying off employees. On paper, you're pretty wealthy. You're worth multi-millions of dollars. Your net worth is 10, 15 million. You employ 100 people. But now you're beginning to lose steam. Those people, even though they're fairly wealthy and their income is tidy and nice, they haven't got enough money to play like the BlackRock game and get a government bailout. I think economic Armageddon is upon us. Again, I strenuously urge all clankers to prepare for a recession. Prepare for shortages. We're seeing them more and more. It's not just baby formula anymore. It's tampons and maxi pads and things of that nature. It's goods that you do actually need to have. When you have the U.S. military airlifting crates of baby formula to Indiana, this is not an optics win for the administration. And that's the other part of it. This is the other part of why I think he's cratering. Despite all the glowing praise from the legacy media, well, no mean tweets, although his tweets are typically incoherent and when fact-checked are repeatedly wrong. It's funny to see even Snopes have to go after Biden on a regular basis at this point. They didn't do that in the first year. They didn't dare to. Despite all of that, the messaging of the administration and the absence of Biden and Kamala and most other members of the administration in actually explaining things to people, their aloofness, the perceived elitism of the administration is also beginning to rankle people. We've had more than a few let them eat bread moments already in the current economic crisis after an entire year of denying that the inflation even existed. That's what we're seeing here. Middle class, stuffy, NIMBYist liberals that don't have a problem with the poor being poor. They don't have a problem with the working class struggling to make ends meet, but don't you dare do anything to destabilize their economic situation. We're also potentially on the cusp of a housing bubble. We're also potentially on the cusp of a tech bubble. If those bubbles burst right now, we are looking at a Great Depression. There will be tens of millions out of work. The government will scramble to bail everything out, which will cause even more inflation, causing a death spiral situation we haven't seen since the 1930s. Thankfully, we probably won't also have a dust bowl. Although, apparently, right now, there is a shortage of chili peppers. Sriracha, that company has stymied production. They can't get enough peppers from California due to a drought, I think. We've got everything going wrong. No wonder people don't approve of Biden. The fact that he's even in the 30s and that he isn't sub 30 right now is a testament to legacy media propaganda having a bunch of middle-class CNN watchers hogtied. And it's hogwash, because most of what they're saying is clearly not true. So yes, Biden has successfully done what few presidents do, which has become so unpopular that even core audience members, core fans of the Democratic Party have begun to flee. They are realizing that doesn't mean they necessarily become Republicans, by the way, or anything like that. But for every point he loses, the midterms are hazarded more and more. This kind of gap, I don't actually think has existed in a midterms in the last 50 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. This may be the worst approval gap of a sitting president, and that correlates almost exactly with what happens especially in House seats. I would now favor the GOP as well to win the Senate, albeit narrowly. That's about all. Peace out.